That tree is a community eyesore, Mr. Mercer, and the board has determined it falls within the aesthetic jurisdiction of Millbrook Crossing. We'll have it removed by end of month. That was Renee Fulton, president of the Millbrook Crossing Homeowners Association for 3 consecutive elected terms, standing at the foot of my driveway one Tuesday morning in late March of 2022, wearing a cream linen blazer and kitten heels that pressed small divots into the soft spring ground with every syllable she delivered. She had a clipboard tucked under one arm. She had not looked at it once. She was informing me that she intended to remove the white oak my late wife Cora had planted the spring our daughter Maya came home from the hospital. What Renee did not know, and had never once bothered to check, was that I had spent 31 years as an International Society of Arboriculture certified arborist, that I had a notarized boundary survey on file with the Harmon County Recorder's Office, showing that tree's trunk center sitting 4.2 feet inside my recorded lot line with 0 encroachment on the common strip, and that 6 months before this conversation, I had quietly purchased the park parcel where the Millbrook Crossing HOA held every single one of its board meetings. She was standing at the foot of my driveway, explaining to me what she planned to take. She was standing, in a more precise sense, on my land. She did not know either of those things yet. I stood there in my work boots with my coffee going cold in my hand and listened to her finish. If you had been standing where I was standing that morning, what would you have done? My name is Dale Mercer. I am 58 years old. I ran Mercer Tree and Land Services out of a shop on Route 9 in Harmon County, Ohio, from 1991 until I sold the trucks and equipment in 2019 and moved my ISA credentials into consulting work. 31 years of climbing other people's trees, reading municipal site surveys, applying for county permits, and arguing with city foresters about root zone setbacks and canopy ordinances will make a man very comfortable with the County Property Records Office. It is not the kind of knowledge people envy at dinner parties. In the spring of 2023, it was the only knowledge that mattered. Cora and I bought the lot at 14 Millbrook Crossing Drive in the summer of 1998. When the Millbrook Crossing development was still mostly red clay and surveyor stakes, and a brochure promising mature streetscaping within 5 years. The streetscaping never came. The developer planted a row of ornamental pears along the main road, put a small covered pavilion in the park at the center of the development, and called it done. So Cora drove out to a nursery in Garfield Township on a Wednesday afternoon in April, and came home with a white oak sapling in a 5-gallon nursery pot about 2 feet tall, a single straight stem with a few lateral twigs and more future than I recognized at the time. Maya had come home from Harmon General 3 days before, sleeping in the bassinet in our bedroom, and Cora was still moving slowly and carefully. But she dug the hole herself in the front corner of the lot, away from the utility easement and back from the sidewalk, set the root ball in with her bare hands, and tamped the soil around it with the heel of her work boot. She stood up and looked at it for a moment and said what she said, the way she said most things worth saying, without any ceremony at all. Something that will outlast us both. That was April of 1998. By October of 2021, when Cora had been gone 2 years from pancreatic cancer, Maya was 14 and getting herself up every morning at 6 for track practice. And that oak was 51 feet tall with a canopy spread of 38 feet that went copper orange without fail every fall, and dropped enough leaf mass in November to fill 8 compost bags, which I sorted and composted every year because that was what Cora would have done. And it was the best thing I knew how to do for a tree she had planted with her hands. I had the tree's placement surveyed in 2009, 13 years before any of this started. A previous HOA board, different president, different clipboard, had sent me a notice claiming root system encroachment on the common strip and asking me to have the tree trimmed at my expense. I called Hank Beal, a retired Harmon County licensed surveyor I had known through county permit work since the mid-90s, and asked him to run the boundary in writing. Hank spent a morning on site with his transit equipment and his legal pad, and produced a notarized boundary survey documenting the trunk center of the white oak at 14 Millbrook Crossing Drive as sitting 4.2 feet inside my recorded lot line, with subsurface root extension of no more than 18 inches onto the common strip, well within the standard tolerance for adjacent canopy trees in Ohio. I filed the original with the Harmon County Recorder's Office. I kept a copy in a manila folder in the second drawer of my shop filing cabinet, labeled in black marker, 14 Millbrook Crossing Drive. Survey Beal, 2009. The previous HOA board received the survey by certified mail and dropped the matter. I put the folder away and did not think about that tree again in any official capacity for 13 years. Cora used to call it my filing habit. She said it the way she described most of my trade-related tics, with the affectionate slight tolerance you extend to someone whose occupational quirks never quite turn off at the door. Every job I ran for 31 years, I kept an after-action folder, the site survey, the client sign-off, the county tree permit if one was required, the arboricultural assessment, the before and after photographs. 3 decades of that will make documentation feel less like paperwork and more like the ordinary practice of a careful person who wants to be able to explain themselves later. I taught Maya without meaning to teach her. She was maybe 8 or 9 the first time she sat in my shop on a rainy afternoon and watched me sort a year's worth of job folders into the cabinet. She asked me why I kept so many papers. I told her because someday someone was going to ask me a question and I wanted to already have the answer. She thought about that for a while. By the time she was 12, she was keeping her own manila folders for school assignments, for her track meet times, for her annual physicals. She is more organized than I am now. She gets it from her mother. The Millbrook Crossing HOA had been a minor background presence for most of the 24 years I lived there. Annual dues that I paid on time, occasional notices about grass height or holiday lighting that I addressed without argument. A single complaint once about a landscaping trailer parked in the driveway for 3 days while I was doing a weekend job on a neighbor's silver maple. I had come to regard the HOA the way most homeowners regard a slow drain, an occasional inconvenience you manage without ever taking fully apart. Renee Fulton was elected HOA president in the spring of 2020, about 14 months before Cora died. I had no strong opinion of her at first. She was visible in the way that some HOA presidents are visible, driving the development's perimeter in a white SUV with a personalized plate, different blazer every time, taking the long way around the cul-de-sacs at a speed that said she was cataloging what she passed. I noticed her the way you notice weather that has not yet decided what to do. I was occupied with other matters that year and the year that followed, and the HOA was the last thing on my list. What I did not know about Renee Fulton in those years was the part that mattered. Her husband Craig ran a company called Fulton Property Holdings, LLC, registered in Harmon County. Craig's LLC held the ground lease on the Millbrook Commons Park parcel, the quarter-acre piece at the center of the development where the pavilion sat and where the monthly board meetings were held. The lease had been in place since 2011, a county land trust arrangement that required an annual payment to remain current. Craig had stopped making that payment 2 years before Renee walked up my driveway with her clipboard. The parcel was quietly going delinquent. I did not know any of this yet. Renee was counting on it, and she was right, for a while. The first notice arrived on a Tuesday in late March. 2 pages on HOA letterhead in a font that was larger than it needed to be, signed by Renee Fulton in looping blue ink script. It identified the white oak at 14 Millbrook Crossing Drive as a community aesthetic concern, citing excessive leaf litter accumulation on the adjacent common strip and what it called an irregular canopy overhang, negatively impacting the streetscape harmony of Millbrook Crossing. It requested I hire a licensed tree service to trim the canopy to a 10-foot clearance above grade and remove any dead wood within 30 days at my expense, or face a compliance fine of $200. I read it at the kitchen table that evening while Maya sat across from me doing her chemistry homework. She looked up from the notebook and said, "What is it?" I said it was a letter about Mom's tree. She reached across and read it without getting up. She set it back in front of me and said nothing for a moment, then said, "Handle it." Not a question, a statement about what was going to happen. I put the letter in a new manila folder and called Hank Beal the next morning. Hank still had the 2009 survey in his files and mailed me a fresh, notarized copy within the week. I pulled my original from the cabinet. I wrote a 2-paragraph letter to the HOA board. The tree is on my deeded property per a notarized survey. Filed with the county canopy overhang in the incidental range is standard and within tolerance. Trimming decisions for a tree in my sole legal ownership are mine to make. Mailed it certified, return receipt. Filed the receipt and a copy of the letter behind the notice in the folder. That was the first exchange. The folder was thin. It would not stay that way. 6 weeks later, the second notice arrived. The board had reviewed my response and found it insufficient. A compliance fine of $200 had been assessed, and a new line. The board had determined that continued non-compliance may necessitate direct action under Section 12.4 of the Millbrook Crossing Covenants, which authorized the association to perform maintenance on features affecting common area aesthetics at the responsible owner's expense. I looked up Section 12.4. It applied to common area features. The oak was not a common area feature. I paid nothing. I filed the notice. A second certified response went out the same week, same language as the first, plus a note that Section 12.4 on its face did not apply to privately deeded property as documented by the county-filed survey. I went to the July board meeting and stated my position in 3 sentences during public comment. The tree is documented on my property. The survey is on file with the county. Section 12.4 does not apply to owner-deeded land. Renee listened with her head tilted to the right in the way of someone who is not listening at all, but performing the shape of listening. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Mercer, we appreciate you making the trip tonight. But the community's determination is that this tree functions as a common area feature regardless of the survey line. The canopy impact and the leaf accumulation are the operational issue. The boundary question is a separate matter." She smiled at me with considerable patience. 2 of the board members looked at the table in front of them. The third member nodded along. I wrote her exact words in the margin of my legal pad and underlined regardless of the survey line. That was the second time she voiced her position. I had it in writing twice now. Filed. The third notice came in August and dropped any pretense of a request. The board had contracted Harmon Tree professionals out of Crestline to perform the removal, and I would be billed upon completion under the HOA's Section 12.4 authority. I called the number on the notice. The man who answered confirmed he had a job scheduled at a Millbrook Crossing address for an oak on the common strip. I asked him to read the lot description from his work order. He read a lot number. It was the common strip lot, not my lot. He had been given the wrong information. I told him the tree was on privately deeded land with a recorded survey and suggested he verify the work order before scheduling his crew. He thanked me and said he would check with his client. I wrote down his first name and the time of the call and filed it. My certified letter to the HOA went out the same afternoon, third time now attaching the survey, and this time adding a sentence. Any contractor who performed work on my deeded property without my consent would be doing so in violation of Ohio Revised Code, and I would pursue every available legal remedy. I addressed a copy to Judith Crane at the county recorder's office by name. That is a small signal, but it is a signal. 4 escalations, 4 responses. The folder was getting heavy. It did not stop. On a Wednesday morning in October, I was at my shop desk going through site assessment paperwork when my phone rang. Maya. She was home for a school half-day, teacher conferences. Her voice was flat in a specific way I had learned to recognize in the 2 years since Cora died. The flat of someone who is deciding, in real time, how much to feel about what is happening. She said, "Dad, there's a truck out front with a lift." I said, "What kind of truck?" She said, "A tree service truck, with a crew and a chainsaw." The saw started in the background before she finished the sentence. The sound of it came through the phone and landed in my chest in a way that had nothing to do with a tree, and everything to do with what Cora had put in the ground 24 years before. I was in my truck in under a minute. I drove home in 8 minutes. They had the crown on the ground by the time I pulled up. The crew was working through the main scaffold branches with a reciprocating saw, and the secondary growth was already chipped. Maya was on the driveway with her phone up, footage running continuously. She had been recording since the truck arrived. She did not look away from her screen when I walked past her. I went straight to the crew foreman, a heavy-set man in a yellow hard hat, and asked him to pause for 1 minute and give me the written work order. He handed it over without argument. The work order listed my full street address, described the tree as a common area oak at 14 Millbrook Crossing Drive, and cited Section 12.4 authorization signed by Renee Fulton. The stump was 22 inches across at the cut face. I photographed the work order front and back. I photographed the stump, the crew, the truck, and the white SUV with the vanity plate sitting at the end of the cul-de-sac. Maya had already sent her footage to 2 separate cloud backups before I walked back across the yard. She lowered the phone and looked at me. She said, "I got the truck arriving, the whole job, and the car down the street." I said, "Good." She said, "Now what?" I said, "Now we build the case." The bill arrived 11 days later. $1,400. Tree removal service, Millbrook Crossing Common Area Maintenance, per HOA covenant authorization, itemized in 3-line items. I did not pay it. 4 days after that, a complaint was filed with the Harmon Township Code Enforcement Office, claiming a commercial vehicle was being stored in a residential driveway in violation of the Township Commercial Vehicle Ordinance. The vehicle in question was my 3/4-ton consulting pickup, which I drove to arborist site visits 2 or 3 times a week. Code Officer Willis came by on a Tuesday, walked around the truck with a clipboard, and told me the ordinance threshold was 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight rating. My truck was rated at 8,500, not subject. He apologized for the inconvenience and completed his inspection form, noting the complaint origin. I asked him to note in writing that the vehicle was a personal consulting vehicle used in a sole proprietor licensed professional capacity, not a commercial fleet vehicle. He added it. I filed his completed form with his name and badge number written at the top. 6 incidents now, all of them documented. All of the folder for the Renee Fulton correspondence had expanded to 3 folders, labeled in sequence on the outside edge. In November, I got a call from a man named Todd Pressman. He ran a small insurance brokerage out of a strip mall in Garfield Township and had held a minority partnership stake in Fulton Property Holdings, LLC, since early 2020. He said he was calling because he had reached a point where silence no longer sat well with him, and he wanted me to understand it was his own decision, not something anyone had asked him to do. He said the lease arrangement between Fulton Property Holdings and the Millbrook Crossing HOA for the use of Millbrook Commons had been running on a registered county ground lease since 2011. Craig Fulton had been the managing member of the LLC that held the lease. 2 years back, Craig had stopped paying the annual lease remittance to the county land trust that held the underlying parcel. The taxes on the parcel had gone delinquent. Todd had raised it with Craig twice in writing and once face-to-face over the past year. Craig had told him the first time it was being sorted, the second time it was handled, and the third time to mind his own business. Todd said Craig's business had become his business since his name was still on the LLC registration paperwork, and he had decided he was done being a silent party to whatever Craig was or was not doing with the parcel. He had been thinking about who to call. He called me. I wrote down every word on the legal pad open on my desk. I thanked him and asked whether he would be willing to speak with me again if needed. He said yes and gave me his direct line. I sat with the notepad for a few minutes after the call ended, reading what I had written. Then I opened my laptop. I pulled up the Harmon County Auditor's online tax portal the same afternoon. The parcel number for Millbrook Commons was in the delinquency queue with a total outstanding balance of $22,412. 2 full tax years, plus statutory penalties and interest. The county had sent delinquency notices to the registered agent address for Fulton Property Holdings, LLC, which turned out to be a mailbox service address at a shipping store on Route 19 that Craig had apparently stopped checking. The parcel was 92 days from being eligible for public tax sale listing under Ohio law. I called the Harmon County Treasurer's office the next morning and asked for the procedure for purchasing a tax-delinquent parcel at public sale. The woman I spoke with was helpful and thorough. She mailed me the paperwork packet within a week. I filled it out at my shop desk on a Saturday afternoon, had it notarized at the bank on Monday, mailed it back with a cashier's check, and kept a photocopy of everything. I told Maya at dinner that evening. She looked up from her plate and said, "You bought the park." I said the county sold it to me, a tax sale, yes. She said, "The park where they do the meetings." I said that was correct. She looked at me for a long moment, not quite a smile, but in that direction, and said, "Mom would have bought it too." She went back to her dinner. I did not say anything to that. It was already said. The county confirmed the purchase on January 14th, 2023. The deed transferred on January 19th. Recorded and stamped by Judith Crane, Harmon County Recorder, at 9:47 in the morning. I drove to the recorder's office and waited while the entry was processed. Judith handed me the certified copy across the counter with a manner that was professionally neutral and personally very slightly amused, in the way of a county official who has processed a transaction they find interesting, but whose job is to record it, not to editorialize. I thanked her and drove home and put the deed in a 4th folder. The label said, Millbrook Commons, parcel number, deed, January 19th, 2023. I put it in the 2nd drawer behind the survey folders and the Renee Fulton correspondence. The drawer was getting crowded. That was fine. The drawer was winning. The lien notice arrived the same week as the deed. The HOA had filed against my property under Ohio law for $1,710. The $1,400 removal bill plus a $310 administrative charge, attaching to my deed as a recorded lien. I brought the notice and my full set of folders to Priya Suresh, a property and contract attorney with an office on the 3rd floor of the Harmon County building downtown. Priya reviewed the file in one sitting. She told me the lien was deficient on its face. It cited Section 12.4, which by its plain language applied only to common area maintenance, and the 2009 survey on file with the county made unmistakably clear that the tree was not on the common area. She said she would file a notice of dispute with the county recorder's office and a formal written objection to the HOA board. She also sent a letter to Renee Fulton personally noting that filing a knowingly deficient lien against a property owner in documented sole ownership was actionable as tortious interference with a property interest under Ohio law, and that she should govern herself accordingly. The HOA board's written response came back 8 days later, signed by Renee in the same blue looping cursive. The board respectfully disagrees with your assessment and stands by its authority under the Millbrook Crossing Covenants. Priya read it across her desk, looked up and said, "That is the sentence I am going to enjoy reading to a judge." I filed the letter. 3 days before the April board meeting, I sent a certified letter to the HOA board stating that I had a matter of property record to present and would be attending. I did not say what the matter was. Renee replied with a 2-line note welcoming my attendance and noting the 3-minute public comment limit. I called Judith Crane and asked whether she would be willing to appear as a document witness. She said she had found the January transfer professionally interesting and she would come. Hank Beals said he would be in the front row. Maya said she was coming before I had finished asking her. I arrived at Millbrook Commons at 6:45 on a Tuesday in April. The pavilion overhead lights were on, somewhere between 30 and 35 residents in folding chairs. Renee at the board table with 2 other members, clipboards, and an agenda printout. Craig Fulton stood near the left entrance of the pavilion in a dark sport coat with his hands in both pockets. He had never attended a board meeting in the 3 years Renee had been president, not as far as I had seen. His presence meant that something had moved in the Fulton household, that a piece of information had traveled through some channel I could not see and produced a certain level of alertness in the man who ran Fulton Property Holdings. It was the alertness of a person who suspects something has changed, but has not yet identified what. Judith Crane came in at 10 minutes to 7 with her county portfolio under her arm and stood against the back wall. Hank settled into the second row on the aisle and crossed his arms. Maya took a seat 3 chairs in from the aisle and put her phone face down on her knee, same as she always held it before she needed it. The meeting ran through its standard agenda. Landscaping Subcommittee update. A revised parking policy the board had drafted over the winter. Summer event planning for the park. And then Renee mentioned the ongoing property enforcement matter regarding resident Dale Mercer, stating that the lien was proceeding through proper legal channels with every expectation of resolution in the association's favor, and that the board wanted residents to know the covenants would be applied consistently and without exception for the benefit of the whole community. She said it with the practiced ease of a person who has not been seriously contradicted in a public setting for a long time. Several residents glanced at me. I looked at the table. When the public comment period opened, I stood. Renee noted the 3-minute limit with a brief look at the wall clock. I walked to the front. I had 3 documents in my hand, the pages separated by paper clips. I set them on the board table face up, one at a time, spaced far enough apart that each board member could read a separate one. First, the 2009 Hank Beals survey, notarized, filed with the county, showing trunk center 4.2 feet inside my lot line. Second, the Harmon County Recorder's certified deed transferring the Millbrook Commons parcel to Dale Mercer as of January 19, 2023. Third, Priya Suresh's 1-page analysis showing the lien's legal deficiency under Ohio property law. I set the last one down and stepped back half a step and did not say anything. I let the room read. Renee reached for the deed first. She held it in both hands, and read it the way I have watched property owners read a survey result that says the opposite of what they believed. She found the parcel number at the top, the transfer date, the grantee line with my name on it. She set it flat on the table. She looked up and found Judith Crane standing at the back of the room. Judith gave a single, measured nod. Renee said, "This isn't possible." The word possible came out small, stripped of the performance quality her voice usually carried. It was the voice of someone who has just understood that the room they have been standing in for 3 years has a different owner than they thought. Craig Fulton took 2 steps toward the table from the left side of the pavilion, and Hank Beal said from the second row, without raising his voice or standing up, "The tax sale was published in the Harmon Courier for 60 days, Craig. It is a matter of public record." Craig stopped. He did not speak. He looked at the deed on the table and then looked at a point somewhere between the table and the floor and stayed there. The board member to Renee's right began putting his jacket on with slow, deliberate movements, one arm at a time, the way a man dresses when he has decided to leave, but is waiting for the appropriate moment. The board member to her left looked at the survey, then at the deed, then at the middle distance above the pavilion entrance. The hum of the overhead fluorescence was the loudest thing in the room for a long moment. I said, for the record, that any board meetings held at Millbrook Commons after January 19th, 2023, had been held on private property without the consent of the owner. February, March, and this evening made 3. I said, if the HOA wished to continue using the pavilion going forward, I was willing to discuss a formal written use arrangement at a fair market monthly rate. I said the recorded lien on my property was legally deficient and required written withdrawal within 10 business days. I said the $1,400 removal bill for a tree removed without my consent from my deeded property needed to be voided in full. I said all of it in level sentences with even spacing between them, the way you read from a written list when you have prepared carefully and do not need or want a response. Then I sat down. Judith Crane stepped forward from the back wall and said, "For the public record of this meeting, that the deed transfer was valid, recorded, and current as of the county's files." She stated that the prior lease arrangement between Fulton Property Holdings, LLC, and the County Land Trust holding the underlying parcel had lapsed due to non-remittance of annual payments totaling $22,400 over 2 consecutive tax years. She stated that 4 separate delinquency notices had been sent to the registered agent address of the LLC without response. She stated that the parcel had been offered at public tax sale pursuant to Ohio Revised Code, and that the purchase by Dale Mercer had been completed under the standard statutory procedure. She said it in the plain, exact cadence of someone reading a county record into a public meeting, which was precisely what she was doing. The room held still for a long time after she finished. Then it did not. Renee Fulton asked to be noted in the meeting minutes as resigning from the board of directors, effective immediately. She stood, picked up her clipboard without looking at what was on it, and walked out of the pavilion past Craig, who did not move to follow her or speak to her as she went. The board member, who had been putting on his jacket, stood and left behind her. The third board member stayed in his chair and stared at the deed on the table in front of him, with no readable expression at all. The residents in the folding chairs behind me held very still for a few seconds, and then the low sound of 30 people exhaling at roughly the same moment filled the space under the pavilion roof. The lien was withdrawn in writing before April 15th. The $1,400 removal bill was voided by the end of the month. The referral to the Harmon County Auditor's Office for tax compliance review of Craig Fulton's LLC went out within the week, and over the following months turned up an additional $11,000 in delinquent filings across 3 related parcels he had been running through the same mailbox address. Todd Pressman's name was noted in the audit referral as a cooperating source. I heard from Todd once after that, a brief message saying he felt better. I wrote back and said I understood. Priya filed the civil damages claim in May, and the HOA's liability carrier settled in September for $3,800, described in the settlement language as compensatory damages for unauthorized removal of a valued specimen tree from private residential property. The number was not enough to replace what had been there. Any licensed arborist will tell you a 51-year-old white oak with a 38-foot canopy spread cannot be replaced, only approximated, and only in decades, by a tree that someone else will have to be patient about. But it was what the law provided, and the law had been on my side since April of 2009, which was the whole point. The HOA board dissolved the following spring when the remaining members could not seat a quorum for annual elections. The covenants expired with the association. No new board formed. The street has been quiet in the way streets go quiet when the clipboard goes away, and people start talking to each other directly again. The pavilion at Millbrook Commons is still standing on my parcel. I have not done much with the land yet beyond maintaining it. I walk through it some mornings with coffee when the weather cooperates. The oaks along the perimeter fence are maybe 40 years old. Good canopy form, tightly rooted at the base, the kind of trees a careful person would have surveyed and documented. Cora would have approved of them. Maya was 17 when the last papers were signed. She keeps her own files now for college applications, for financial aid, for her track records and sports physicals, all of it labeled and in order in a plastic crate on her desk shelf. She is organized in her mother's way, completely and without making any particular commentary about it. She does not ask how I am doing very often, but she does other things instead, small things that register. Last October, she came in from the front yard with a single copper oak leaf from somewhere along the street, set it on the kitchen table without a word, and went to her room. I left it there through the week. The gap at the front corner of the lot where the canopy used to close is still there. I look at it most mornings and I feel what I feel, and then I go about my day. Because that is what you do when the folder in the drawer already won and the land is still yours and the kid is going to be all right. Here is what I want you to take from this. When you buy a piece of ground, get a survey done. Not the developer's plat, not the HOA's map, not a neighbor's recollection. A licensed, notarized boundary survey with a legal description, signed and stamped by a credentialed professional. File it with your county recorder's office the week you close. Keep the copy in a labeled folder in a drawer you can find in the dark. When someone sends you a notice claiming authority over something they have not verified, answer in writing, certified mail, return receipt, and attach the document that says you are right every time. From the first letter, build the file from Notice 1, because the case is one in the folder long before it is one in any room. And check the tax rolls. Most county auditor and treasurer websites post delinquent parcels in a public database, searchable by address or parcel number, updated monthly. Sometimes the ground your neighbor stands on to deliver instructions about your property has not been paid for in 2 years. The deed office is open to anyone. Use it before someone else does. Drop your own story in the comments. I want to read them, and I think some of you have been waiting a long time to tell them. If this was worth your time today, the subscribe is right there and it costs nothing. Next time, we are sitting with a combat veteran in Colorado who poured a concrete foundation for a workshop on land his family has held since 1971. And the HOA sent a demolition order 4 months after he finished it. What they did not know was what his grandfather actually filed with the county recorder's office in 1971. That story is worth the wait.